Dr. Camilla Stefan from the Faculty of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, and I am your biology instructor. And today we will introduce medicine. So we're going to talk of the very important, the basic concepts in medicine, what each and everyone here should know for our different concours. Okay, so our objectives for this class will be to, at the end, define the key terms, that is medicine, anatomy, physiology, and homeostasis, to be able to describe the body parts with directional terms. We are going to see what directional terms mean, to cite all the body systems and life processes that occur in our body, and finally to cite the several investigations, techniques, and their origins. So we are going to follow the following plan. First, we are going to define, we'll give the branches of anatomy and physiology. We are going to cite some various investigation methods. We'll give a very short review of the body systems, and we'll talk of the life processes. We'll have a little overview of the homeostasis, give a basic introduction to anatomy. We'll talk of the anatomical positions, the directional terms, talk of the regional terms, and we are going to illustrate what the body planes and sections are, along with the body cavities and membranes. And finally, at the end, we are going to conclude, and we'll have a little tutorial session. Okay, so to define medicine, we'll say that medicine is the art of preventing and curing diseases. So this science is concerned with the maintenance of the well-being of every human being, to maintaining every human being in good health conditions. So that's what medicine has to do with. So a physician, unlike the normal terminology that we use, is somebody who is being taught, trained, and licensed to practice the art of medicine and science of medicine. So unlike our normal vernacular, a medical doctor is actually being called a physician and not a doctor, because a doctor is somebody who has a doctoral degree in the university, and as such could be, for example, a doctor in chemistry or a doctor in mathematics. So a physician is somebody who has been educated, trained, and licensed to practice the art and science of medicine. So anatomy is a science that studies the morphology, the structure of every organism. It could be, we are going to see the different sub branches of anatomy. So anatomy mainly has to deal with the structure. When we study the structure, the morphology meaning how does an organ look like, what are the structures, how are they arranged, in what direction, in what are the relationship that existing between them. So that is this science, we are going to call that anatomy. And physiology is a science that studies the vital life processes and of living organisms. So in physiology, we are going to study on how all of these processes, how the functioning of our body organs, of our systems. We are going to see the different subtypes, the different sub classes of physiology. We are going to see those different sub branches of the physiology. But physiology, when we talk of physiology, we talk of the functioning of an organism. We want to look at how does this system function in our body to be able to produce this output, for example, for us to live in normal and good conditions. Okay, so now we'll give briefly the branches of anatomy and physiology. Okay, so as first branch of anatomy, we have macroscopic anatomy, which is a study of very large body structures that are visible to our naked eyes. So for example, the study of the heart, the study of the digestive system, the stomach, kidneys, the brain, and all of the rest. So those are all organs that we can see. So we talk here of macroscopic anatomy. Then we have systemic anatomy. So in systemic anatomy, we study the structure and morphology of body systems. We study it systems by system. So for example, we are going to talk of the anatomy of the cardiovascular system, anatomy of the nervous system, in which we are going to look at the structure of every organ that is associated to the nervous system. We'll also talk of different, so we are anatomy systemic anatomy has to deal with the study of the morphology and structure of our body systems. Then regional anatomy is the anatomy that studies the morphology, the relationship that exists in between structures that are found at a particular region in our body. For example, the regional anatomy of our abdomen. So when we talk of regional anatomy, we talk of regional anatomy at a particular point, a particular region of our body, and we study the organs, the morphology, the shape of those organs at that particular region. So for example, we can study the regional anatomy of the thorax, or for example the neck. We can study the regional anatomy of the neck, in which we are going to see the different structures that are found at the level of the neck, different arteries, different veins, and every structure that exists in our neck, their relationship, that exists in between each of them. Then we have microscopic anatomy. So microscopic anatomy has to deal with the study of very little structures that are not visible to our naked eyes. So for example, we have histology and cytology. So in histology, we'll be studying the structure and morphology of body tissues. So this is a very important part of medicine, histology, as by recognizing a tissue, we could be able to determine if the tissue is in good condition, is in good healthy condition. We could be able to determine, for example, if the patient has some structural diseases of their tissues. Then cytology is a science that studies, or it's the branch of anatomy that studies the structure and morphology of cells in our body. The structure and morphology of cells in our body. So how the different organs are. The cells, for example, of the nervous system are different from those of the digestive system, both in structure, in morphology, and all of the rest. So in cytology, we study these different cells, and we are able to studying the normal structure of cells permit us to be able to identify when there is something that goes wrong. Then another branch of anatomy is developmental anatomy, that studies the structural changes that occur in the body throughout the lifespan. So in here mainly we talk of embryology. Embryology, that is a subdivision of this developmental anatomy, and which studies the structural changes that occur from fertilization to birth. So in embryology, we are studying how a zygote, a fertilized egg, a zygote, is being, the different changes that undergoes on it for it to produce a baby. So now, concerning the branches of physiology, the main branches, you have renal physiology, that concerns the functioning of the kidneys and urine production. Neurophysiology, that explains the workings of the nervous systems and coordination. So how does our nervous system function to permit us, for example, to have memory, to permit us, for example, to think, to permit us, for example, to converse, and all of the rest. So neurophysiology. Cardiovascular physiology, that examines the operations of our heart and blood vessels. So how does this heart, how does this system does to be able to pump heart, how does this system does work in transport and all of the functionings. So here we talk of the cardiovascular physiology. So now we'll briefly go into the investigation methods and imaging techniques. So these imaging techniques and investigation methods are important as it helps us to investigate through a patient to find out where the disease, what is the cause of the disease, to find out to be able to detect some signs that could perhaps not be visible with our normal eyes. So in an imaging technique, for example, is a technique that is an investigation method that permits us to look through the body and look at what happens in and what is found in the body without having to dissect the body. So we call it a non-invasive method, because you don't have to cut through the body to be able to see what is found in that body. So different imaging techniques we have. The first is the conventional X-ray. So the conventional X-ray, or the X-ray, or at times we call it the radiograph. So this is actually a method that is highly being used in our hospitals, and we are very familiar with this. So actually for example, in the X-ray, so what you should mainly know is that the X-ray is actually essentially a shadowy negative of internal structures. So what do I mean by shadowy negative? So first of all, let's look at what happens when we pass an X-ray through the tissues of somebody. So as we pass X-rays through somebody's tissues, the dense structures absorb the X-ray more, and so appears as light areas on the radiograph. Actually, why does it appear as light areas? Because these dense structures, as they absorb more X-rays, right? They absorb more X-rays, so you have actually less X-rays that reach at the level of the detector. So you have less X-rays that reach the detector. So the X-rays there are very small, so it produces the light area. Then you have hollow organs, or organs that are very light, right? They absorb less X-ray, and since they absorb less X-ray, you have more X-rays that are being transmitted and arrive at the level of the detector for those organs. So that is going to produce a shadowy negative. Okay, a shadowy negative, meaning that you have a black and white image that is shadowy. Then in computed tomography, this is mainly an investigation method. So formally we were calling this computerized axial tomography, but this is not very important for your concours. So what you should know is that computed tomography, it is a very refined version of X-ray imaging. So we use computed tomography because what's the difficulty with X-ray imaging? The difficulty with X-ray imaging is that when you are passing through an X-ray, the X-ray, normal conventional X-ray, cannot distinguish when you pass it, for example, through somebody's abdomen. It cannot distinguish that this particular organ is at the top, this particular organ is in the middle, this particular organ is very down. So what we use, so the conventional X-ray cannot give us that, so it produces a superposed image. But now with computed tomography, it is very refined. It's able to give us cross sections through a patient's body, and it's able to tell us which particular organ is found at the top, which one is found in the middle, and which one is found at the back when we pass the X-ray through it. So how does this function? So the patient is slowly moved through a donut-shaped CT machine, so that's a computed tomography machine. So its X-ray tubes rotate around the body and send beams from all directions to a specific level of the patient's body. So that level is the level that the machine wants to take a cut through and look at what is found at that particular level of the body. It could be, for example, the chest. Okay, so because at any moment its beam is confined to a slice of the body about as thick as a dime, CT ends the confusion resulting from overlapping structures seen in conventional. So this is what we are just from saying. So conventional X-ray normally give us overlapping structures that are superposed on each other. So because of CT scan, the fact that you have X-ray that come from many directions, the detector is able to determine that a particular organ is found, the exact position of that particular organ. Okay, so the computed tomography permits us to be able to have a greater insight into the body of a patient. So the device's computer translates its information into detailed cross-sectional pictures of each body region scanned. So here with computed tomography, we have actually cross sections. With X-rays, we have not cross sections, we have a superposed image of the body organs that is being formed, or we can talk of overlapping structures. So we mainly use CT scan to be able to get the forefront. So we use it as forefront for evaluating majority of the problem that affect the brain and the abdomen. Then the next imaging technique is the positron emission tomography. The positron emission tomography, or the PET scan, at times you see it as PET scan. So PET, what happens here is that you have some radioisotopes. What the physician does is that he injects some radioisotopes into the body of the patient. So these radioisotopes, they are actually found, they are being tagged, or they are being linked or attached to some biological molecules like glucose that the body knows to use a lot, that the body can absorb. So it's been injected into the blood vessels, and then now these radioisotopes now, as they are being absorbed by some organs in our body, for example brain cells, these radioisotopes now can produce high energy gamma rays. These high energy gamma rays are being detected, okay, and once they are being detected, the PET scan, or the machine or the computer, is able to analyze it and produce a live action picture of the brain's biochemical activity, for example here in vivid colors. So here it permits us to look at the activity that takes part. For example, cells that are very metabolic, cells that do a lot of activities, for example at level of our brain, they will have tendency to absorb more glucose, and in absorbing more of this glucose that is being tagged to this radioisotope, there will be more radioisotope, and this more radioisotope is going to produce more gamma rays, a lot of gamma rays, and these regions will appear under the computer, or when they will be analyzed, they will appear as region of high brain activity, okay, because the biological molecule that was tagged to the radioisotope is producing the gamma rays that is being detected by the computer. Okay, so it gives us insight into the brain activities. So it gives us insight into the brain activities in people affected with mental illness, for example stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and epilepsy. So it also helps us determine which area of the brain are more active during certain tasks, for example during speaking. So it is from these methods that they were able to detect the part of the brain that has to do with speaking, because when you speak, for example, the cells in that part of the brain, they are more active, they take in more of these biological molecules, glucose, and hence the computer detects a lot of activity at this particular point, and that's how scientists are able to, or physicians are able to determine that is the part of the brain that is associated with speaking, listening, figuring out of mathematical problems, for example. Then the next imaging technique is sonography, or ultrasound imaging. So this imaging technique is the one that is being used in obstetric units by the obstetricians. So to observe the fetus, for example. So that's what we usually call radionormal terminology. So this ultrasound imaging permits us. So how does it function? First of all, so you have a probe. There is a probe that produces sound waves. So these sound waves, as they pass, they are being reflected by some tissues, okay, and as they are being reflected, there is a detector that detects these sound waves, and the computer analyzes these echoes and construct a type of blurry outlines of those body organs from the echoes they have reflected. So this image now is being showed, is now being displayed on a monitor, and from that the physician can be able to observe what is happening in the patient's body. So we use this, as I said, in obstetrics to determine, for example, the fetal age, the positioning, and to be able to locate the placenta, for example, or also to be able to determine the sex of the fetus. Then another very important imaging technique is the magnetic resonance imaging, so or also called the MRI. So magnetic resonance imaging, so it is very important because it produces high contrast image of very soft tissues in areas where X-rays and CT scans are very weak. For example, at the level of our brain, we mainly use the MRI for the brain. So what does MRI do? What does it do? So MRI primarily maps the element hydrogen in our body. So where there is more hydrogen, that's in soft tissues where you have more water, so more hydrogen. So where there is more hydrogen, we can use the MRI to be able to produce images of those parts of our bodies, like the brain, for example, the brain, which is a soft tissue. So what MRI does is that it produces some magnetic fields that make the hydrogen atoms oscillate, and from that the computer is able to analyze regions of our body according to their content in water. So MRI distinguishes body tissues based on their water content, so it can differentiate between fatty white matter and more watery gray matter on the brain. So because dense structures do not show up at all in MRI, it usually used to pierce into the skull and the vertebral column, and it enables us to view the brain, the spinal cord, which are soft tissues. So we actually use it particularly well to detect tumors and degenerative diseases like Alzheimer. So we'll shortly have a review of the body systems. So the first system we look at is the integumentary system. So this integumentary system has to deal with our skin. So it forms the external body covering. Okay, forms the external body covering. Okay, so it helps protect deeper tissues from injury, synthesizes vitamin D. It also has receptors for pain, pressure. It also has sweat glands. So those are the functions of our skin. The skeletal system, that is the system that helps to protect and support body organs, made up of bones. It also produces a framework for muscle to attach and cause body movements. It also helps in blood cell formations and mineral storage. The next system is the muscular system, which allows body movement. It is responsible for facial expression, that's the muscle of the faces. It helps to maintain posture. It helps to produce heat, for example, when you shrivel in very cold conditions. The next system is the nervous system, which is a system that acts fastly in controlling our body. So it's a system that helps to regulate our body fastly. So we are going to see that this is contrary to, for example, the endocrine system. So it also helps to activate appropriate muscles and glands. So now the endocrine system is a system that is made up of glands. So it's a system that has to deal with the production of hormones. Okay, so it is a slow acting control system, unlike the nervous system, and it helps to regulate metabolic processes. The next system is the cardiovascular system. So this is a system that helps us to pump. So we have the heart that helps in transporting, mainly transport. So this is mainly our transport system, made up of the heart that pumps blood, the blood vessels that transport blood, and oxygen, blood for food, oxygen and waste exchanges. So they transport mainly food, oxygen, waste, that could be urea, carbon dioxide, or any other waste. So these exchanges and all of these metabolites are being carried by our cardiovascular system. The next system is the immune or the lymphatic system. So this system helps to pick up fluid that leaked out from the blood vessels, and it helps to return this fluid back to the blood. So when at the level of the capillary, there is always some fluid that leaves the capillary walls to enter the interstitial space. That means it leaves from the capillary lumen and it goes to the interstitial space where the cells are found, where the tissues are found. So this fluid is constantly coming out from the capillaries and is being picked up by the lymphatic system. Okay, and this lymphatic system resends all of these fluids back, that we call the lymph. It resends all of this fluid back to the blood. So it also helps to dispose debris in the lymphatic system. It also houses white blood cells and prepares them to defend the body. The next system is the respiratory system. So this is a system that helps to keep a constant blood concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it helps us to get rid of carbon dioxide and to take in oxygen. The next system is the digestive system. So this is a system that helps us to break down food into absorbable units, so which are then transported, which could be used, they could be stored. So mainly undigested stuffs, they are eliminated as feces. The next system is the urinary system. So this system has to deal with maintaining pH, water and electrolyte. Okay, stable pH, stable water and electrolyte concentrations in our body. So it also helps to eliminate nitrogenous waste like urea. Then the next system is a reproductive system that has to deal just with the production of offsprings, and we'll also see some other some other functions of the reproductive system. But the main function of the reproductive system is for the production of offsprings. Okay, so now let's get into the life processes and homeostasis. So we are going to talk here of metabolism. We'll talk of the responsiveness. So these are majority of the characteristics of living things. So they metabolize, they're responsive, they move, they grow, they can differentiate at times, and they reproduce. So homeostasis is simply the maintenance of a constant body environment, meaning that everything in our body must be kept in a constant, very relative narrow range. In a narrow range, meaning, for example, the concentration of body should be kept of the concentration of glucose in our blood, for example, must be kept in a particular range. Our body temperature, for example, must be kept in a particular range. So homeostasis indicates a dynamic state of equilibrium or balance in which internal conditions vary but always within a relative narrow range. So a negative feedback mechanism is one in which the output shuts down the original stimulus so that you don't have an excess reaction to the stimulus. So in the negative feedback, the output comes back and shuts the original stimulus so that you have a reduced intensity. Okay, so that you have a reduced output. The response should be moderate. So we call this a negative feedback mechanism. A positive feedback mechanism is one in which the output instead goes to feedback and enhance the original stimulus. So this is mainly what the positive feedback mechanism is all about. So we're going to talk of the anatomical description. So let's get deep into what the anatomical description is. So the anatomical position, to start, we'll talk of the anatomical position. So this is the position of reference that us physicians will use to be able to describe the relationship that exists in between every body organ, in between themselves. So in the anatomical position, as you must see here, you have a person that is erect, that is standing erect with the feet that are slightly apart, the palms that are facing forward, the thumbs that are facing outward, outward or to the exterior, just like this. So this is somebody standing in the anatomical position. So whenever you have to give a reference or to compare the position of every two organs or systems in anatomy, you are going to consider the anatomical position. So for example, everything that is at the top we call it superior, everything that is at the bottom we call it, as it is down we call it inferior. Okay, so for example I can say that for example the ankle is inferior to the knees. Okay, I can say that the elbow is, for example, the elbow here, I can say that it is inferior to the shoulders. I can say that the head is superior to the chest. So we use this anatomical position to be able to describe the relationship that exists in between them. So we also have the notion of lateral and medial. So if I draw a line through that divides the body into two equal parts, the more I am closer to this middle line, the more I am medial. The farther away I am from this middle line, the more I am lateral. So for example here, I am going to say that the neck is medial to the shoulder because the neck is found more in the middle than the shoulder. For example, the ears are lateral to the nose because the ears are found more away from this middle line than the nose. Okay, so it's very important that you know all of these terms as you are navigating through the body, through anatomy, as you'll be navigating through different lessons. Then you have the notion of proximal and distal. Distal simply means, so we use these notions just when we have to deal with when we have to deal with the hands and the feet. So when you have to deal with our arms. Okay. When we have to deal with our arms and so our limbs, in fact. So concerning the limbs, or what we are going to call the appendicular skeleton, these limbs, they are being attached at a particular point to the main body, that is a trunk. Okay, like the leg, they are being attached at a particular point to the trunk. So the farther away I am from this point of attachment, the more distal I am. For example, I will also say that my feet are distal to the knees. The feet are distal to the knees, for example, because they are farther away from this point of attachment than the knees are in the anatomical position. Whereas proximal simply means that you are closer to the point of attachment to the trunk than the other organ. So for example, I would say here that my elbow the elbows are proximal to the wrist. Okay, the elbows are proximal to the wrist, for example, because they are closer to the point of attachment of the arms to the trunk than the wrist. So you mainly have that. Then right and left, I believe all of us know what right and left means. Then anterior and posterior. So anterior means everything that is at the front part. The more I am going to the front, I can talk of anterior, I can talk of ventral. Then posterior, the more I am back, I am going back, that's backward, okay, in the dorsal part of the body. So anterior, posterior, superior, inferior, proximal, distal, lateral, okay, lateral, then medial. So these were our directional terms. Okay, so now let's look at the regional terms. So regional terms, so they are So we have two fundamental divisions of our body, so the axial and the appendicular part. So the axial part of our body is the main part that forms our body trunk, and then the appendicular part of our body are mainly what forms the limbs. Okay, so this is the axial part of the body, and then this is the appendicular part of the body. So the axial part makes up the main axis of our body. They include the head, the neck, and the trunk. The appendicular part consists of the appendages and the limbs. Okay, so they are attached to the main body axis or the trunk. Then it is also very important that you have good knowledge on the body plane. So what's the body plane? So it's just a plane that passes through the body. So a plane is a 2D structure, a 2D structure that passes through the body. So our body is often sectioned or cut along a flat surface that we call a plane. So the main planes that we have are the sagittal plane, the frontal plane, the transverse plane. So let's know what is a sagittal plane. The sagittal plane is a plane that is vertical first. It is vertical and it divides the body into a right and a left part. So the sagittal plane is one that divides the body into a right and a left part. So now when you have a sagittal plane that passes through the middle of our body, we call it the median plane. Okay, then the next plane we are going to look at will be the frontal plane. So the frontal plane is also a vertical plane. It's a vertical plane that divides the body into an anterior part and a posterior part. So a forward part and a backward part. So that is a frontal plane. A frontal plane in blue here. That shows here in blue. Then the next plane we are going to look at is a transverse plane. So a transverse plane now is a horizontal plane. Okay, it's a horizontal plane that divides the body into a top part and a bottom part, so a superior part and an inferior part. Okay, so we usually call these planes, when they cut through the body, if we observe the region that has been cut, we are going to call that cut or that section of the body, we will name it after the plane which has cut it. So for example, if I look at the part of the body that has been cut by the sagittal plane, I'll call that the sagittal cut of that particular part of the body. If I look at the cut, for example, so here we have a transverse cut, here a transverse cut of the abdomen. Okay, we have a transverse cut of the abdomen because it has been cut by a transverse plane in the anatomical position. So this is a sagittal plane dividing the body into a right and left part, the horizontal or transverse plane that divides the body into a top and inferior part, the frontal plane that divides the body into an anterior and the posterior part. Then other sagittal planes offset from the midline, so we call them parasagittal planes, so they are near the midline. Okay, so let's look at the different body cavities and membranes. So what's a body cavity? The body cavity is simply a hollow in which we find many organs, in which we can find some important organs. So mainly we have two sets of body cavities. Okay, that's the dorsal body cavities and the ventral body cavities. So the dorsal body cavities, this is our dorsal body cavities. Okay, this is a dorsal body cavities here. So the dorsal body cavity. So this dorsal cavity, body cavity, is actually is made up of the cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity. The cranial cavity is the one that houses the brain and other organs like the cerebellum, medulla oblongata, and other organs that are found in the cranial cavity. The vertebral cavity is mainly the one that houses the spinal cord. So both of these cavities together form the dorsal body cavity. They are called dorsal because, as you might notice, they are posterior. We said another name for posterior is what? Is dorsal. So we call this the dorsal body cavities, whereas these are a little bit anterior. These other body cavities here are anterior, so we call them the ventral body cavities. So these ventral body cavities, you mainly have the thoracic body cavity and the abdominopelvic body cavity. Okay, you have the thoracic body cavity. This thoracic body cavity is the one that is at the top. Then you have the abdominopelvic body cavity. So we merge this one in pink and that in green here, and we merge it and we call it together the abdominopelvic cavity. So we are going to say that the abdominopelvic cavity is divided into a superior and an inferior portion. Remember, superior means at the top, inferior means at the bottom. So you have the superior portion here, which is the abdominal cavity. It houses the intestines, livers, and many other organs that are found at the level of the abdomen. Then you have the inferior part, which is the pelvic cavity, that contains our reproductive organs, bladders, the rectum, and some other organs. So that is the pelvic cavity. So now our thoracic cavity. Okay, so let's first of all note that the thoracic cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity or the abdominal cavity are separated by the diaphragm. They are separated by the diaphragm. So at the thoracic cavity, I mainly have the pleural cavities. Okay, the pleural cavities that contains the lung, and I have a cavity that is found at the middle. So we call this cavity in the middle here, of in between the two pleural cavities. To the two pleural cavities, we call this the mediastinal cavity or the mediastinum. And this mediastinum contains many organs like the heart, the trachea, and other organs. Okay, so you have the mediastinal cavity. So this mediastinal cavity is divided into two. So you have the superior mediastinum and the inferior mediastinum. The inferior mediastinum is the one that houses the heart. Superior mediastinum houses the trachea, some blood vessels like inferior vena cava, superior vena cava, and esophagus and other structures, nerves, and all of the rest. So we said at the level of the thoracic cavity, we mainly have the pleural cavities that are found how laterally we have the pleural cavities, and then medially we have the mediastinal cavities. The mediastinal cavities is divided along the frontal plane in the frontal cut. So this is a frontal cut here along the frontal plane into a superior part and an inferior part. The superior part, which is the superior mediastinum, and the inferior part, which is the inferior mediastinum. So this here is a sagittal cut. Sagittal cut, why? Because is sagittal cut. Why? Because in the sagittal cut, you have the body here that is being divided by the sagittal plane. Okay, so if you observe, what you see that this was cut by the sagittal plane, and here you have the frontal cut, or because we said we named the cut according to the planes which cut the body at that particular point. Okay, so now let's talk of the body membrane. So it's very important that you know that every organ in our body is being recovered by a membrane. Okay, and these membranes that recover our body, for example, these cavities, okay, they are being lined interiorly by a membrane, and that membrane most of the time is, for example, in the pericardial cavity. Okay, in the pericardial cavity, the membrane that lines the walls of that cavity is called the serosa. So these membranes, we call them the serous membranes or the serosa. So these serosa mainly line the walls of these cavities. So in the pericardial cavity, we have the pericardial serosa. Okay, and the part of this serosa that lines the walls of the cavity is called the parietal layer or the parietal serosa. So we have the parietal serosa here. We have the parietal serosa that lines the pericardial, the walls of the pericardial cavity. Then this parietal serosa actually reflect back to itself to produce another serous membrane that is now going to line the organ itself, that is going to recover the organ itself, and that part of the serosa that is in direct contact with the organ is what we call the visceral serosa or the visceral serous membrane. So this visceral serous membrane is the one that is in direct contact with the organ, and in between these two serous membrane lies a space that contains a fluid, okay, a fluid that, for example, in the level of the, if we take the pericardial cavity here, we are going to talk of the pericardial or the serous fluid. So talk of, and this is a fluid that helps in lubrification, okay. So now let's talk of the abdominal regions and quadrants. So because the abdominal region is very large and contains a lot of organs, it has been very important that us physicians divide it into smaller areas for study. So this abdominal cavity is mainly divided through transverse and parasagittal planes. So you have transverse plane that divide them into superior and inferior parts. So you mainly have two of these transverse planes and two of these parasagittal planes, okay. So these planes are positioned like tic-tac-toe grids on the abdomen. So mainly we have, so these different areas of the abdomen, you have the hypogastric or the pubic region. The hypogastric region is the one that is located inferior to the umbilical region. You have the right and the left iliac, or at times we call it the inguinal region, which are the parts of the abdomen that are located lateral to the hypogastric region. So these inguinal regions, they are lateral. Remember, we said lateral means they are farther away from the middle line of the body. Then you have the right and the left lumbar regions. So they lie lateral to the umbilical region. The umbilical region is the one that contains the umbilicus, that's our navel, what we call our navel in normal English. So the umbilical region is the one that contains our region. So lateral to that umbilical region, we have the two lumbar regions. The two lumbar regions that are the right and the left lumbar regions. Then more superiorly, we have the right and the left hypochondriac regions, okay, that constitute that are at the flank of the epigastric region. So the epigastric regions, they are directly superior to the umbilical regions. Directly inferior to the umbilical regions, we have the hypogastric region. Then lateral to these epigastric regions, we have the two hypochondriac regions. So the right and the left hypochondriac regions. So another way of dividing the abdominopelvic cavity is by using quadrants. So if we use quadrants, we divide it into two equal parts, okay. So we are going to have a right upper quadrant. So like we take a middle line, we divide the abdomen into two. Then we also divide, that means along the sagittal plane, we divide it into two. Then we also divide it in a transverse plane into a superior and inferior part. So just one sagittal plane and one medial sagittal plane and one transverse plane. So it divides the abdominopelvic cavity into four. So we're going to talk of quadrants. So we are going to have the right upper quadrant, the left upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, and the left lower quadrant. So now the other body cavities, so in addition to these main body cavities, we also have many small body cavities like the oral cavities that constitute our mouth. We have the digestive cavities. We have the nasal cavities. So the nasal cavities that are located posterior and within the nose. Okay, so the nasal cavities are also part of the respiratory system passageways. Then you have the orbital cavities. They contain the orbit, or what we also call our eyes in our normal terminology. So the orbital cavities that are in the skull, they house the eyes, and they are anterior. Okay, they are anterior. For example, they are anterior to the skull. So they open to the exterior. Then you have the middle ear cavities. So the middle ear cavities that contains the ear ossicles. You have the synovial cavities. So synovial cavities, they are found in between bones, right? They are hollows that are found in between bones. Okay, thank you for your attention. F10. Are you sure that is F10? Why can't I just come and press this?
Just come and press it.